Hello everyone, it's me again. I'm back again. My name is Luke Jules, and this is 2I Scene, where we talk about the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people, cultures, history, impacts of colonisation, etc. Hoping that you get a bit more awareness about my people and a better understanding. First of all, this is episode 4. Like I've mentioned in other videos, this is all new to me, but I just have to, please forgive me those who saw the first couple of videos, because I didn't realise, I've only just looked at some of the videos, and I didn't realise that my chair, it was this creaky chair. It's comfortable, and it was always creaking. So I didn't realise until I re-looked at the videos, and I was too lazy now to redo those other videos, that what you see is what you get. And like I said, this is raw, it's real time, it's not AI. If it is AI, it's Aboriginal intelligence, not the other AI. And so please forgive me for those first couple of videos. Like I said, it's my first time doing all this stuff. But like I said, what you see is what you get. And today we'll be talking about the stolen generations. And I keep looking this way. And if you also forgive me, I made myself some stew last night, and I've got some stew and rice sitting on my desk here for lunch, so it's kind of going to distract me. But I just wanted to hurry up and do this video to share this information with you more. So the stolen generations was something that, that most of the population of Australia, the non-Indigenous communities, they've heard the term, they see the title, they have a basic understanding, but they really don't know what it was actually all about. So back in the day, the government, when they removed my people from traditional homelands and country and took them to missions and reserves and the like to remove us from society, part of that process was the stolen generations. Now, the premise that they will teach you and the narrative that they will spin is that under the Child Protection Act, the stolen generations was removing children that weren't being cared for by their families, and that they were put in care to protect them and whatever. And we all know that that's a lie. The premise around it was really and please don't use this term, it's a derogatory term, but the premise was that any child that they considered half-caste, and sadly they even used the term hybrid, which doesn't make sense to me, it's just disgusting. But anyone that was seen as being half-caste or of lighter complexion, any children were taken away. Now, the belief was that eventually these kids were taken away. When they become adults, they'll marry non-Indigenous people, and eventually the Aboriginality will be bred out. And the older traditional full-blooded Aboriginal mob would have died off, and then we won't have any more Aboriginal people in this country anymore. But we know that didn't work because of our resilience, our spirit, our culture, our connection, etc. So these children were taken away. Now, when I said it was under the Child Protection Act, it wasn't like they went around and they monitored families and they checked homes and all that sort of stuff before they took the children. They just did it en masse. That as soon as these laws and the legislation came in, they went around rounding up kids. So it wasn't even at the home. In some cases, it was the kids just walking down the street, and they were snatched up by authorities, doing whatever we were doing, our kids were doing. So they took our kids away, put them in these institutions that were monitored and managed by Christian organisations and other authorities. Now, you can imagine the trauma that brought into the lives of everyone involved. The kids, the parents, especially the mothers, where you're doing your thing, you're playing, you're doing whatever, and then all of a sudden these strangers come and grab you, chuck you in a car, and the next thing you know, you're at this place with all these other Aboriginal kids, never to see your parent again, or have any connection with them, have any connection with community, culture, family, everything. And then you look at it from the point of view of the parents, especially the mothers, like, where's my baby? Why aren't they home yet? Or where did they go? Or only to find out that they'd been taken and that they were now in an institution because of the government has made these laws. So that's traumatic enough. You know, you get parents in that time that also wrote or got help to write letters to the authorities, to governments, to say, look, can you bring our kids back, you know, whatever, or at least give us access to visit them. Most cases that was denied, and so they were never to see their kids again. So under that premise, it was supposedly for the benefit of the children, but we know there was no benefit for the children. Now, once they were in these institutions, in many cases they weren't even allowed to use their name. They were given a number, so they were not called by or addressed by their names. They were given a number. So you can imagine you've been taken away, you're in a strange place. They put these strange so-called uniforms or clothes on us. You know, they'll be crying themselves to sleep. They'll be, you know, only to be told to be quiet and go to sleep. There was corporal punishment back then, so they would have got the paddle or the cane or a smack or a hit or whatever. And this happened overnight. The whole world changed overnight. And the only ones they could rely on is each other that were there. So under the Child Protection Act, it was supposed to help, and they took the kids away, put them in these institutions. You know, these kids were no longer allowed to speak culture, practice culture, sing their songs, do their dance, you know, do anything that was cultural. It was all Christian based. It was all, you're going to learn to do this, and basically they were slaves. You would believe in this God now, you don't believe in another God, you will sing these hymns, you will do whatever. Now, a small percentage of people that went through that process said, oh, well, it wasn't that bad for me. Others had it worse. You know, I've heard, you know, elders that went through that process sadly say things like, oh, no, it wasn't that bad. As long as you stayed in line and you did what you're supposed to do, you know, it was all right. So those who've gone through that have this, you know, love-hate relationship with the process and where they were. So, you know, you get the situation where that based on their race and the colour or complexion of their skin, they're now made a judgment and they're removed. So that's now triggered generations upon generations of trauma, heartache, etc. So you can imagine the pain and suffering that these families would have went through. And like I keep saying, especially the mothers, you know, these kids crying themselves to sleep, these mothers crying, wondering what's going on. How can we do it? We're a minority. What are we going to do? We've got no help. We can't fight the authorities. So, you know, these kids are in this situation. They're told to stop everything and stop practicing everything they've been taught. Stop speaking this strange language and speak English. This is, you know, we're going to teach you how to read and write and speak proper, sit proper, eat properly, use your utensils, how to make your beds, how to do this. You're going to live it in a different way now. But we're not going to address you by your name. We're still going to just address you as your number, whatever number you were given. And these institutions were all around the country. So we fast forward and we look at the outcomes of that horrific event, the trauma, like I said, the long-term pain and suffering, where we're talking about that these kids experience physical abuse, emotional abuse, spiritual abuse, and I hate to say it, but sexual abuse. And they've had to endure that for over how many years until they were old enough to be released. When those young people were released, some did have the opportunity to make it home, and they reconnected with their families, communities, and country, etc. But there was a small population that they were too young. Like when I say children, I'm not talking that all these kids were like teenagers. They were at all ages, including young toddlers and babies. I mean, that they were young ones that were taken. So those younger ones, you can imagine being raised in that institution, that environment. You had no knowledge of culture. You had no knowledge of language or where you're from or community or anything, unless you had older siblings or with you or other relatives with you that could share some of that information in secret. So we fast forward where they become adults. Like I said, some returned home, some didn't because they didn't know. They didn't know anything. They have this ongoing trauma now where they are trying to deal with the events that happen. They self-medicate, they become addicted to substances. Now, because they've been raised in an environment where they weren't raised by their parents, they don't know how to parent. They were given instructions. They were beaten into submissiveness. They were told when to eat, how to sit, everything. And it was, by the stick. And so they don't know how to be parents. So you've created this cycle now where these individuals become parents themselves. They don't know how to parent. And so you can imagine the dysfunction that happens there. Their children have a negative experience. Now, their children, when they get married or have partners and so on, have children, they're going to go through the same process. Once again, you just have to excuse me. I've got a dog on the veranda. This is real life stuff. I'm not in a studio where I can master these things, and I'm too lazy and I don't have the knowledge how to edit this stuff. But what you see is what you get. So they didn't know how to be parents, and so they've created this cycle. They have dysfunctional families. Their relationships break down, and so on. You get some who go on, and they, in some ways, the system succeeds in the white man world where they live like Europeans. And I'm not saying that's a bad thing, but that's just their journey. But they've still had a disconnect from their traditional culture, etc. So some come out and they think, well, I know what it's like to be told what to do every day. I've been in this system. I'm going to make something for myself. I've got limited skills, so I'll join the military. They join the military only to experience another level of trauma, whether it's racism and so on, and the trauma from actual conflict, being in a war, in the war environment. And so that's now compounded. There's more and more trauma added to the fact that they were also stolen generations. So you can imagine for some, it's very hard for them to get into and keep relationships. They have broken marriages, there's disconnects from the children, all this sort of stuff that happens. And the families, if they do connect with their families and the broader Aboriginal community, do try to do their best to bring them back and engage them and put our arms around them and so on. But, in some cases that helps and works. But at the same time, the loss of family is so great for a lot of the people, and the trauma they experience is so great that's even overwhelming for our people to help. and the Aboriginal Medical Services and other organisations do the best they can to help our people, and have put in programs where they can get counselling and support and so on. So we're doing the best we can. But once again, it's an internal thing that our people do amongst ourselves. So all this stuff happens. There are those who, because they're used to being incarcerated at a young age or institutionalised, they go on to commit crimes, and they continue to be in prison and institutionalised. So that's all they know. So why would they go out and do anything different when they know, well, at least I'm going to get a roof over my head, 3 meals a day, whatever. So another level of trauma and disengagement and disconnection and everything else that happens there. And so the premise that the government thought, well, we'll create these functional human beings They'll no longer practice culture. They'll no longer worship what they worship, or believe in their totems, or believe in, speak their language, etc. And they're going to be productive members of society. And so that was the level of ignorance and racism and discrimination that happened, and heartache. There was no empathy around the fact that you are taking someone's child. You are disconnecting children from their parents, and especially their mothers. And that matriarchal system and everything else that comes with our traditions and our practices. And so, like I said earlier, some, when they got out, were old enough to remember where they were from, who their mob were, and they were able to reconnect. Some couldn't because they didn't have any understanding, and they only found out later on in life from relatives or family saying, oh no, you're so-and-so's mum, son, daughter or son, and your dad is this person, and your mum is this person, and they were able to reconnect. But then they have to sort of make up for time and relearn and relive, and be part of their communities and families again. So there was all this trauma. So you can imagine, what will happen if that happened to you. For everyone here listening that are parents, two eyes seeing through a black lens and white, just to see it for a moment. If that happened to you, if the authorities for no reason came and said, we're going to take your kids away, for no other reason other than whatever that they make up, it would be so heartbreaking. Now, I tell you now, if they regurgitated this stuff and anyone come to my house or my land here on my property and try to take away any of my children or grandchildren or anything like that, all I can say is may my sword be swift and accurate, because it ain't going to happen. So we also fast forward where there's loud enough noise from the Aboriginal people and from the stolen generations themselves, where there's an inquiry or a royal commission, whatever it was, into the actual stolen generations, where they were able to come forward and share their stories, as heartbreaking as it was. Out of that came a report, and then further on from that, there was finally an apology. So the then Prime Minister, Kevin Rudd, gives the apology to the stolen generations on behalf of the government and so on, and also to ensure, in part of, or at the end of that apology, to ensure that it never happens again. So that was that. The government then decided, well, we can't just leave them like this. So they created a number of programs. One was the Link Up program, where Aboriginal people who were part of Stolen Generations could reconnect and find out who their family were and reconnect. Some of them were successful, where they were able to find. Others weren't, because there was very little knowledge about. And when we look at records, people say, oh, why don't they just look up the records? I don't know why it is or how it happens, and whether it's just a conspiracy theory, but Aboriginal people, our experience is that every time we look at this sort of stuff, whenever we want to go and the people talk about records and let's look at it, all of a sudden we get the story of, oh no, it was burnt in a fire. Every single time it's like, oh no, it was in a fire. The building burnt down and all the rest. Like, really? So anyway, that's another tangent of mine about, some of these processes and lies and rhetoric that is spun to our people. So the Link Up was designed to link up people with their families and bring families together, where the parents could contact this organisation. Look, my children were taken away. They went to this, institution, and this was their names at the time. This is where their ages, and try and find out. And then those who were part of Stolen Generations could do the same thing. Now, sadly, on a side note of that process is some did find out who their families were, but I also, unfortunately, also found out that their parents and their mothers had actually passed. And so, once again, they're hit with another sad experience of not actually meeting their parents or their, especially their mothers. And so there's another level of trauma and heartache that's now attached to what they've already experienced. So, there's all these programs, but in my opinion, there's never been a process to really heal our mob. And any healing processes that are in play now is what Aboriginal people we've pushed for, that we've created for ourselves. Now, someone could say, oh, yeah, but at least, you mob can help each other. You can do it yourselves. Why are you waiting for government? You can do. Yeah, it's true. We can do it for ourselves. But we also need the resources and support to be able to do that. So, for example, if we're going to take someone back to country to get healing, traditional healing, we need resources. We need transportation. We need resources to be able to help this person go back to community, or even if it's not their own community, at least some community that can actually help them and heal and go through the traditional healing processes. And the Aboriginal Medical Services do the best they can with what they've got, the resources that they have. So, that's my argument back to those naysayers who think, oh, well, why don't they move on and get over it? It's not that easy. And why aren't they just helping each other? Leith knows about this. Why doesn't he go and help our mob? Trust me, you do all you can with what you have. So then we come, around that time of the apology and everything you had, where people started to get some more information and want to know why some were happy, and that I'm talking about non-Indigenous people, they were happy that the Prime Minister apologised, but there were a lot that weren't happy. Like, why are we apologising? It wasn't us that did it. That happened whenever. That happened back in the day. So why do I have to apologise for something that I didn't participate in, or I didn't implement, or I wasn't a part of? So, we had all these walks across the bridges. Sydney Harbour Bridge, the bridges in Canberra and all around Australia. And I remember working for government, I was obviously working for government at the time, and I had these colleagues of mine that's, non-Indigenous mob say, hey, Lee, we went to Sydney on the weekend, and we were there that day. We on the other day, and we crossed the bridge. I said, so what did you do? He goes, we crossed the bridge, and it was fantastic. There were Aboriginal and Torres flags everywhere. There were people everywhere. People were singing, and people were holding hands, and there was a plane that flew over that spelled the word sorry, and everyone was cheering, and it was such a great day. And I said, okay, so what did you do after that? I said, what do you mean? He goes, what did you do after you marched up there? Oh, we went down to Darling Harbour. We went to a nice cafe and restaurant, had something to eat, and then we went shopping. I said, so did you take an Aboriginal person with you? And they're like, what? I said, did you take an Aboriginal person with you? And they said, well, no. I said, did you talk to an Aboriginal person when you were walking across the bridge? Well, I said hello, and I waved and smiled at them. Did you talk to an elder or someone from the stolen generations? No. And bless them, I said, look, I understand, the sentiment and your intention. I said, but it can't be just about you making yourself feel good and feel better and looking at history and saying, I was there that day. Yeah, you may have been there that day, but it's not about that day. It's about what comes after that day. What did you do? What have you done? How are you helping to change the system? How are you helping the stolen generations, etc.? So, yes, there were a lot of good intentions those days, those marches, all that sort of stuff, but nothing happened after that. And so, we look at all these organisations that came around, Reconciliation Australia, the Healing Foundation, all these organisations that were created to assist and support and help Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people. And some access those organisations, but many don't. They suffer in silence. So we have to find a way to help those people. Now, when it comes to our traditional healing, yes, we have processes and practices that we still do today. But the reason why we can't get, any assistance from the government whether it be state, federal, or whatever, is because under the government's processes, we can only fund programs that are health and wellbeing programs that are evidence-based or medically proven, although there's thousands of years of evidence to show that our healing processes work. But it's not, it's a taxpayer's money. We're accountable for it. We can't just send them back to country and do whatever you want to do because it's not evidence-based. So we do it in secret. We do it on our own. We, do the best that we can with what we've got. The Aboriginal Medical Services do the best that they can. The Healing Foundation, all these sort of places do the best that they can with the resources that they have. And so, we do need more in way of assistance and support to actually help our people heal. We mentioned about what some of them have done since, when they were old enough to leave or when they came out of that process. Obviously some self-harmed and were successful, as in suicides, because they couldn't handle the trauma and the heartache and the pain and the suffering. And so culture plays a big part in the healing process. And so when people talk about the stolen generations, I encourage people to investigate it, look at it for yourself. There's a movie that came out many years ago, The Rabbit-Proof Fence. Now, it's one family's experience during the stolen generations in Western Australia. It's a hard watch, but it'll give you an insight into what the stolen generations was all about and how it impacted the individuals involved, their families and communities. It's very rare that you have any Aboriginal families that weren't impacted by the stolen generations, that they had someone that they, in their bloodline, someone in their community, someone in their families at some stage that was taken away and grew up in that system. So what I encourage people to do is that don't take my word for it. Do your research, find out. Now, if you have the courage to engage Aboriginal people, now what I mean by that, if you have the courage to go and attend a NAIDOC Week activity or a Reconciliation Week activity or July 1, which is a Torres Strait celebration, engage the people. Visit the elders' tents, visit the elders, talk to the old people. Now, these are those that went through the stolen generation, our elders, they're our living libraries. So you could learn so much information. So engage someone, and if you do find out they were part of stolen generations, and they'll share it if they want to share it, and they won't if they don't. But ask them, what their experience was and what it was all about, and you will hear first-hand experiences from that individual about what happened, and get you get a personal, first-hand insight into it. As hard as it is to hear. Now, we don't want you, like I gave the example about the bridge, walking across the bridge. Now, we don't want you to just have this information and now I've got a better understanding. We want you to be our ally. We want you to be our support. We want you to go in and bat for us as well. That if you work for a government agency, is, whatever it may be, raise. So what's the Indigenous perspective of this? How is this program, is there something for the Aboriginal people, or is it going to be catered to them, or whatever it is for the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people? And become our ally, become our support base. Some people look at you strange, like, well, hey, what's Johnny's interest in this? He's a white fella. And all of a sudden he's talking about we need to support Aboriginal elders, we need to support Aboriginal kids, we need to support Aboriginal veterans. Well, what's going on here? And they're not going to understand because they've had the blinkers on and they're ignorant to the truth. So become our allies, go out there and find a way of educating others about it, encouraging other people about it. We look at the end result of the stolen generations, and those that were part of it, there's a time in their life a timeline in their life that they'll never ever be able to get back and change, and that there was so much taken away, there was so much loss, you know, and the physical stuff that happened in there, not just all the abuse and everything else, but, you know, having all these powders put on them to rid the lice, you know, if they had any, made to wear certain clothes, and when they have a bath, you know, scrub them with a hard bristled brush to get all that dirt and whatever it is that they, you know, BS that they want to create about our kids. And that's what they lived. You know, these poor little things cried themselves to sleep. And it breaks my heart to even think about it. And we don't want to think about it because of that fact that it's too heartbreaking. So no, Letha, I don't want to talk about it. I don't want to watch that movie. I don't want to read that book. I don't want to listen to this. But sometimes we have to lean into that for us to get a better understanding of the journey and how that impacted. That one incident just didn't impact those kids and their parents and their families. It impacted the whole nation of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people. So don't take my word for it. This is just a brief discussion about the stolen generation. So take the time to find out more, investigate more, Google organisations that are linked to the stolen generations and see what is being done and what you could do and something that you could participate in, and share our story, share these stories, share these videos, share whatever you need to do to get the message out there and the knowledge out there. That, you know, we're not asking for people to feel sorry for us. We just want the people to know the truth of what really happened to our people, and it continues to happen today. So thanks for listening and watching. I hope you got something out, a little something out of this, and you know, I hope you have a good day and a great day. And remember, don't just see it through your lens, but see it through the lens of another man as well, of others, and hopefully you'll have a better understanding of yourself, and you'll have a better understanding of others. So take care, and I'll talk to you on the next video. Okay, bye.